About 10 years ago, a friend of mine attended a presentation at her workplace about workplace safety, and the keynote speaker was Spencer Beach. My friend said, "You have to read his book. He has quite an amazing story." So I did. And unlike other books, Spencer has always been in the back of my mind. I've been a fan of his for years, and I'm thrilled he accepted my invitation to be a guest on the Rising Strong podcast. Welcome to the show, Spencer.
Thank you, Lisa.
So in 2003, you were involved in all I can say is a horrific workplace accident. Can you take us back to that day?
Sure. So I woke up in the morning, average ordinary day. I've done a lot of mentoring over the years, and I found everybody's story starts out the same way on an average ordinary day. You never expect trauma to enter your life, and then it does. I had a feeling in my gut that I was being asked to do a job that I didn't feel was right. I told my wife that I was concerned about it, but that gut feeling, I did what everybody does when your gut's talking to you. I ignored it, right? That's what we tend to do. I convinced myself everything was going to be great and said, I love my wife. Have a good day. See you later. And went to work. I was a flooring installer. My specific role was the service guy. So basically, I drove around Edmonton, Alberta, going from new home to new home, fixing other qualified installers' mistakes. I was extremely skilled at what I did, and the reason being was I grew up in the industry. I went on my first job when I was 6 years old with my dad. And so, anyways, the job I was being asked to do was to go and remove vinyl flooring because another crew installed the wrong color. And my dad had taught me that you use a sharp scraper and it's going to take a lot of elbow grease and lots of sweat. It's really hard work and lots of time. But my employer had a method where you use a chemical. It's a contact thinner, really close to a paint thinner, and you dump it all over the floor, skipping some steps so nobody can do what I did. But you dump it all over the floor, and it would absorb through the material, reactivate the glue, and the flooring would peel up in sheets. So what used to be really hard work of days of two people working really hard, my employer had a service guy doing in his off time. Saved tons of time and loads of money. Unfortunately, I was never trained in WMIS. We had zero safety systems at work. Even if I had any personal protective equipment, it was because I purchased it, not because my employer supplied it or encouraged it. And so I walked into there blind, when it came to my rights, my roles, and my responsibilities in safety. And all I had was that gut feeling as my defense, which I ignored. And it was about 4 in the afternoon when I heard a loud whistle, and that whistle was a precursor that something bad was about to happen. And that whistle was all the air being pulled into the house from the outside because I was in a flash fire, and that flash fire required a lot of oxygen. So there was a loud whistle and then bang. It was an extremely loud bang. Technically, they called it an explosion, and I was engulfed in flames. The biggest issue with being engulfed in the flames in a chemical fire is the average fire burns at about 700 degrees Celsius. But because it was fueled by a chemical, the fire burnt out the properties of the chemical. So my fire was 1500 degrees Celsius. It was more than twice the heat of the average house fire. When the fire did start, honestly, I didn't know what happened. All of a sudden, I was in the normal home, and now I'm surrounded in flames. And I can honestly tell you, your first instinct is just, holy crap, I need to get out of here. So I purely worked on instinct. When the fire happened, I was right at the front door on my knees working away. I was almost done for the day, honestly. I had maybe 5 more minutes of work to go. So I sprung up from my knees and I reached out and grabbed onto the front door. And that loud whistle I heard pulling all the air into the house to feed the fire also created a pressure difference, so it sealed the door shut. And I'm 6'2", 220 pounds. I'm a big guy, and I'm used to carrying full rolls of carpet on my shoulder and big boxes of tools and buckets of glue. Like, man, I didn't have the strength to open that door and break that seal. So I, again, working on instinct, I just like, I need to get to the next closest exit. And because I'm surrounded by fire, your eyes and your mouth will naturally shut in a fire. So Now, everything I did was not only on instinct, but I also did it blindly. So I let go of the door handle and I turned to my right, and 10 feet away from me down the hallway that I just removed all the flooring from was the garage door. So I ran into the laundry room where the garage door was and tried that door, and it didn't open. And then and now I'm trapped because the only way out of that laundry room is the hall I just came down or the door that's not opening. So I let go of the door handle. I went back into the front entry, tried that door again. It didn't open. And people always ask about the sensations. They always want to know, like, did it hurt or anything? It was like, yeah, it hurt more than you can imagine. I often will joke in saying that women in childbirth have nothing on me. Yeah, but the pain was different. Like, we've all been burnt before. That's one unique thing about burns is not everyone will experience a car accident or go through cancer, but everyone will have a burn. The only difference is usually they're pretty minor. But it was nothing like any burn you've ever had. I could feel the heat inside of me. And honestly, it was so intense that I could also feel my life being drained from me. I knew I was in trouble when this door didn't open. I knew if I didn't get out soon, I wasn't getting out. So I let go of the door handle. I ran back through the hallway to that laundry room, tried that door again. It didn't open. And estimate it took no more than 20 seconds for me to do all of that when I'd had enough now. I couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted it over. I collapsed into a ball and interlocked my fingers with the back of my head. I tucked my face as close to that floor as I could, and I gave up. It was horrific. Like, I could feel my hair being burned off of me, my skin. Out of all the sensations, the one that I remember the most is how the skin on my face felt like it was shrinking as it was melting to my skull and tightening up. Yeah, it was horrible.
I truly believe that you were made for more. There must have been some divine intervention or something that day. As a medical professional, I am shocked and surprised that you lived through that. You had a near death experience, and you say that that resulted in your greatest message. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So when I gave up, um, you gotta put yourself in my shoes at this moment. I'm in a raging fire. Like, the howl of the fire was intense, and the heat was more than you can imagine, and the pain was unbearable. And I got all these extreme sensations going on at once. And then I just slipped into this place. The way I describe it is like going to sleep. When you're comfy in your bed and you're tired and you're just ready to go to bed, and you just let yourself go there, right? You let yourself fall asleep. That's kind of what I was doing, is letting myself go to the next realm. And when I did, everything became really peaceful. All those extreme sensations totally disappeared. It was the most euphoric feeling of my entire life. And in that moment, all I could think about was my wife, Tina, and she was 4 months pregnant with our first child. It took me a long time to truly break down what it was occurring in this experience, but if you back up just a millisecond prior to that experience of dying, and prior to the fire, it was like I was worried about getting a job done, living up to my commitments, making money, paying bills. I was worried about what I had to do tomorrow. This was a rush job. I had to be out of there that day. I was being pressured to do that. I was going home to plan my friend's bachelor party that night. I had all these commitments that were dictating my day and also dictating my responses in my day. And now on the verge of death, I didn't care about my bills. I didn't care about my job. I didn't care about that house. I didn't care about my friend's bachelor party. I didn't care about anything other than my wife and my unborn child. And what I came to determine or appreciate, and it took a long time to figure this out, was my near death experience was I was thinking about my last thoughts. And if they're my last thoughts on this world, I'm pretty confident they're probably going to be my most important thoughts. And it turned out that what was important to me weren't all those things that dictated my day or that also the responses in my day. It just turned out to be the people I loved. So my greatest message to people is it's really hard to give me a bad day. And the reason being is I know what my most important thoughts are. And my most important thoughts are not anything that's happening on social media, not any political thing going on, not any restructuring of any government agency, not any bill that I might be tight on or living paycheck to paycheck. My greatest thoughts every day is the people I love. So I measure my success of every day like this. If at the end of the day my family is happy, healthy, and safe, I had a real good day. I can honestly tell you nothing will matter beyond that. And what I found really interesting, and being a motivational speaker, you're always looking for like um, the similarities between me and other people. Everyone has the same most important thoughts. Everybody has people that they live for, that love them. And I can promise you, like, death is a natural thing. It's going to happen to everybody. And we're all going to experience that moment when we get to have our most important thought. But I had to learn mine actually dying. Everyone else just has to appreciate what it is because I guarantee you already have it. And we let all these other things dictate and distract us in our day when they're really meaningless.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Now tell us about the time emergency services came. They loaded you up in the ambulance, took you to the ER. Tell us about that.
Well, first, I will get there right away. But right now, your listeners are like, he's still on a fire. How did he get out? So,
Yes, yes,
um,
tell us that.
so yeah, ultimately it was um, I had to try again, thinking about my wife and the baby. I relived all the things I was gonna miss with them and the things I was never gonna see, like know if I had a boy or girl, or what was the name of my child would be, or walking them to school, or dating my wife again, or anything. And so I tried for them one more time. And when I did, the flash fire was burning itself down because the fumes were dissipating. So the seal, that vacuum was being also decreased, and I now had the strength to open the door. Door opened, I jumped into the garage, created another fire because that's where all the garbage from the construction was. And on the top was all the flooring I removed soaking the same chemical, and I'm on fire. So I created the second fire when I landed on that garbage pile. But the overhead door was open, so I just regained my balance and ran to the end of the driveway and collapsed on my back. So then now emergency services came. It took 11 minutes for them to come. 13, I believe 13 calls went out to 911. And my first experience actually with the healthcare system was lying on the ground, screaming my life was over, waiting for the ambulance. When an off-duty nurse came and muscled her way through the group of tradespeople gathered from their homes, and she told me she was an off-duty nurse. She tried to keep me calm. She found out I was married and my wife was pregnant. She did everything she could to get me to focus on those things. And I'm very thankful for her because I was literally screaming my life was over. I didn't see me ever get into the hospital. So, but her training kicked in and it's what I needed right then. Paramedic came. I don't really remember the ride to the ambulance because I'm being heavily medicated now. But I did get to the University of Alberta Hospital. We have the best burn unit in Canada, and it's the third best burn unit in North America. They took me right into a private room in the emergency, and there was this massive team waiting for me, consisting of probably about 7 to 10 people. And it was basically all the heads of the departments on the burn unit. So the charge nurse, the doctors, a few doctors, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, dietitians, psychologists, everybody it was going to take if I survived to help me get back. The first thing the doctor did was introduce himself, Dr. Tredget, and reassured me I was in a great hospital. And then he asked me how I was burned. I didn't understand the question. So actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I run a charity event called it's over Burn Awareness Week. And there I educate, we speak to, me and another burn survivor speak to 9 schools over 5 days, and we reach about 5,000 students, and we talk about burn awareness. But he was trying to find out the type of burn I had. I didn't know you could have more than one type of burn. Excuse me. So so he asked how I was burned, and didn't understand the question. So I told him I was burned in a fire. Probably wasn't the most helpful question or answer, but it was the only answer I had. He then asked a couple more questions. What were you doing? What were you working with? And determined it was a chemical fire I was in. After he found that out, it was my turn to start asking questions. And the first one question I asked was how bad it was. I could have looked at any time. Like I was naked, my clothes were burnt off of me. But I was too afraid. I didn't want to see the damage. I wasn't ready to see the damage. So he looked me up and down and told me I had third and fourth degree burns to 90% of my body. That made no sense to me because at the time I couldn't tell you the difference of degrees of burns, and now I have on these burns to most of my body. Well, what does that mean? And he told me I had a 5% chance to live. The reason he gave me a 5% chance to live was because when the fire started, I also had the fumes. I'd breathed in the fumes, so my lungs actually ignited as well. And I had a huge lung injury. Now, if you get a big burn with no lung injury, your odds of surviving are actually pretty good. But the moment you have a lung injury, even with a small burn, your odds of surviving are really low. I've come to appreciate that that 5% was a generous number. Honestly, I don't think I should be here from other burn survivors' journeys I've seen that they didn't make it. Anyways, so after he gave me that 5% chance to live, he then asked me if I wanted to live or die. And the reality is I'm very thankful I had that. I'm the first person I'm told by him that he's ever given that option to. Normally it would have gone to my wife or closest relative. And I'm thankful that it went to me because there's no right answer for my wife. If she would have said, let Spencer live, and then I have a horrible quality of life and I do survive and I chase everyone out of my life and I become addicted, she'd probably like, well, maybe it was better to let him not live. Or what if she said, die, let him go. And then 5 years later, she's walking down the mall with my daughter and she sees a burn survivor with his head up high in their family and smiling and having a good time. And she's like, oh, that could be Spencer. There's no right answer for her. The right answer is honestly when I woke up in the morning and had that gut feeling. But so I chose to live. And that was the start of my journey.
That's incredible. And that's, I think, a really important point that you brought up about give, giving that question to you. I mean, you were thankfully in a state where you could receive that question and answer it. Um, and you're right, that burden on your family, sometimes it has to go that way, but what a difficult question to answer in that moment. Tell us about your thoughts as you were in the hospital. I mean, I cannot imagine everything that went through your head.
Well, that's so first I went into a coma for 6 weeks. And they gave you a medication called ketamine to create amnesia. There's a very small percentage of the population it doesn't work for. I'm one of them. So not only do I remember going through a fire, but I remember going through a coma. And all my dreams are the same. I was cold, helpless, alone, hungry, and yeah, and that's my reality. I took what was happening in isolation in the burn unit and twisted it around in a dream state. And so my mind knew what was happening to me, although I couldn't really feel it or emote it. But I came out of a coma 6 weeks later, and went from having nightmares to living one. At first, and I say this generously, for the first couple days, it wasn't super bad when I came out of a coma. And the reason being is I remembered everything. Yeah, I was severely injured. I had tubes all over, a tube in my mouth. I couldn't talk, but I knew where I was and it was the right place to be. But I did what everybody does. I fell into a trap. And I think it's a natural process, but if you can identify this trap, you can get out of it a lot faster and a lot easier. But I started to replay all the events over and over again. What could I have done differently? What went wrong? Why did my life have to change? What was, why did I have to go through this fire? Right. And sorry, my lung damage happens every morning, but um, I really boiled it down to just two words now. And I think they're phenomenal words everybody says in life in one time or another. And that's why me? Like, why did my life have to change? And why me is the key to anger, depression, anxiety. It what's opens the door for those things to be possible. because you're anchored to a moment or an event or a feeling that you don't like. And you will examine that, looking for an answer and how can I get out of here? But you can't get out of an anchor. An anchor is like sitting there holding you there. So by asking why me, you're not going to find an answer to it. You're instead what you're going to do is be anchored to it. And then it's going to open that door to where you're going to get angry. And the anger is going to bleed into depression, anxiety, and it's going to turn to addictions or chase people out of your life. Or it's the source of everything is anger. And I got trapped into that. Eventually, I did find the answer to why me. Well, yeah, I'm an expert at why me. I've asked that question more than a million times, probably 1,000 times a day. I was asking it, and I couldn't understand why my life had to change. Eventually, when I did find the answer, though, I looked to Prince Henry and Prince William, and because I wanted to find someone with a perfect life, someone who's never had any reason to experience hardship. And then I was like, well, have they ever had a bad day? Because honestly, that's what I boiled down to. I had a bad day. That's what you see on me. And I'm like, well, when they lost their mother in that car accident and the Princess Diana died, I'm pretty sure they felt bad and had a bad day. And they asked, why me? Why did my mom have to die in that accident? I found that it's so universal, not only why me, but bad days, that I started to change the question. And I didn't mean to do this, but I started to do it by overcoming things I convinced myself I was never going to do again. And every time I overcame something I thought I could never do again, I started to be like, well, what else could I do? Well, what else can I do? And then so I've condensed that question down now to what can I do for me? And honestly, I don't use that question a lot, but when COVID hit, I put it right back into play because I had another bad day. I lost all my business in 3 days. So many people experience that, right? And I was like, so at first I felt what I was feeling. I'm a huge believer in feel your feelings, but know to cap them off and then start moving forward. But to go back, you asked about my mental health, my thoughts. So the anger was first. After YME came anger. I was pissed off. I wanted someone had to pay for this. I was angry at my boss. There was another tradesperson that just left. I was angry that he didn't come to help me. I was angry at the hospital because ultimately their care wasn't good enough, which is just BS. But I was angry at a lot of things. One time I told my wife when they pulled the ventilator, I was so angry I told her she could leave me. And anger does that. It chases people out of your life. And then it boiled to depression. And the depression I found is what I found about depression is it took my morals and my values and it threw them out the window. And now anything's possible. So when I was depressed, I'm not a suicidal person. Never really I believe everyone contemplates suicide to the point like if I died, who would show up at my funeral? And that's kind of like to see if we're loved, right? But when you start like deeply, how can I kill myself? That's a different type of suicide. That's when you're really into it. I'm not that type of person. I've never contemplated it except for when I was in the hospital. And I played that game. If I could kill myself, how would I do it? I was completely immobile. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. So the depression led me there. It took my morals and values and it threw them out the window. And what I found with depression is you're not going to make good decisions. Although you feel like you are and you don't see it, you're actually making bad decisions. And you can see it when you're opposing people that love you and you're like pushing them or you're getting mad at them because they didn't say something in the right form or they didn't know exactly how to help you. And you get mad at them and you push them out of your life because of the anger. And what you need to do though when you're depressed is you actually need to lean on those people. You need to like have them help you navigate better decisions so that you make less damage in your life while you're depressed. Because part of coming out of depression is you actually have to go and repair the damage you've done while depressed as well. And then the anxiety came. Anxiety is the weirdest thing in the world. I describe it like having a sumo wrestler sitting on my chest and I just couldn't breathe. Like, honestly, I could not breathe. And what I've come to appreciate is nothing was stopping me from breathing. It was things in my head I had going on that I wasn't tackling or taking care of. And it was creating these physical repercussions to me. And I can tell you, there was a time in the hospital when they'd take the ventilator out and then bring me down to surgery, and they'd have to bag me for air. And every once in a while, the nurse would forget to give me a breath of air. I tried to breathe. I really did. I can tell you, being completely immobile, extremely underweight, heavily medicated, tubes going in every part of my body, stuck in isolation, the most helpless feeling I had in the hospital was when the nurse forgot to give me a breath. And that's what I describe anxiety as, like not being able to breathe, the most helpless feeling in the world.
I concur. I concur with so many things that you've said here today. Like the question, why me? I mean, after losing our daughter in a car accident, and I would say, yeah, for sure, being stuck with anger, depression, looking at other healthy, happy families. Why me? Why my child? Why? And you're right. It's a lethal question. It does not serve us well for so many reasons. Absolutely. There was a time during all these deep, dark feelings you were feeling, your wife gave birth. Unfortunately, you couldn't be at the birth, but she came to visit you soon after with this new little bundle. Can you tell us about that moment?
Sure. So first of all, the only regret I have is missing the birth of my child. And the reason being is that's supposed to be your happiest day in your life. And I missed it. And I don't get it back. You don't get the birth of your first child back. Once it's gone, it's gone. So when people look at me and they see the burns in that, they also see a guy that will never have a happiest day. I've come to face that. I've come to appreciate it, but it's the one thing. That's another thing the fire stole from me was my happiest day. But it also was a great blessing at the same time, and I've chosen to look at the blessing more than the regret. The day after my daughter was born, my wife is an extremely strong lady, and she hates me saying that. She's also very humble. But from what I'm told, giving birth is not an easy process. It's painful, it's exhausting, there's healing that needs to occur after. And usually, mother and child both want to sleep, right? Like, and go and start healing. So they brought him to the Misericordia Hospital. She actually gave birth at home. She gave birth so fast to our first child. So ladies get to the hospital fast. But the ambulance picked him up, took him to the Misericordia Hospital, which is where she was to give birth, but that's also the wrong hospital. I was at the University Hospital. So that was like, and you take those small little things like, I'm in the wrong hospital. And that's enough to crack open the anger. And so they checked them both out. Both mother and child were healthy. And then the next day they released them. So September 28th is the birth of my daughter. 29th, they released them. And instead of Tina going home to rest, she was like, everyone knew how angry and depressed I was. They would have done anything to cheer me up. So instead, Tina jumped in the minivan. My father-in-law was driving, and they came right to the University Hospital so that I could meet my daughter. And when they got to the hospital to enter my isolation room, you had to put on sterile garments, so sterile gowns, gloves, mask, and a hat. They don't make little baby sterile garments, so they put Amber is the name of our child, into a sterile pillowcase. And we called her Amber because AMB is for ambulance and ER is for emergency room because she spent a lot of time in the first 9 months of her life in the hospital coming to see me. As well as Amber goes really great with my last name. So Amber Beach is just a beautiful name. But they brought Amber in to meet me, and I couldn't hold her. I was that weak. So Tina raised the railing of the hospital bed up, and then she put a blanket over it and laid Amber right here in the crook of my arm. When she laid there, I looked at her hair and her nose because I was missing a big chunk of my nose. So it was really important that she had a nose and her ears. I counted all her fingers because mine are all messed up. And I'm a religious person, always have been. I did fight with God in the hospital, but I've come to really appreciate, like, there were so many times I prayed in my life, like, Lord, find me a girlfriend or a wife, have a good job, help me through this time in my life. So many things I've prayed for to either get me through something or improve my life. I never once prayed for hair or nose or ears or fingers. And I kind of looked at my daughter and I'm like, well, everything I lost, she has. She has a fresh start. And to me, that was really important because part of that fresh start is she also needed two things in that fresh start. She needed her mom and her dad. She had the mom, but at that moment, she didn't have a dad. Physically, she had a dad. Emotionally, mentally, she did not have a dad. What my daughter did for me that day, figuratively, and I have to say that because I've actually had a child ask if that she really did do this. I'm like, no, it's figuratively. But up until the first 5 months of my incent, up until the birth of my daughter, I found my eyes were looking the wrong way. My eyes were turned inward, and they were examining everything about my life that had changed. And they didn't like anything they saw. I hated it all. And that was a big cause of that anger was that why me, but that my eyes were looking the wrong way. And when my daughter was born and laid in my arms, what she did is she forced me to look outside of myself. And that was the first time I truly did look outside. And when I looked outside, I saw my wife and supporting me coming every single day, wanting nothing more. She only had one want, and that was try to get better. I'd convinced myself there was no point in even trying to get better. I saw a daughter who needed a dad. I saw this hospital, this amazing hospital, with all these people, like extreme professionals, doing everything they can for my care. I saw my friends and family and doing what they could to support me, mostly by supporting my wife and doing things around the house for her that, as a pregnant lady, it's a little difficult for her to do. Like I saw all these things in my life, these people, these most important thoughts that I had worth fighting for. And it was because of them I chose to try. And I share this message with people all the time. I don't care what your eyes see when you find something worth trying, grab onto it and try. You don't have to want to fight for yourself when you're that deep and dark. But if you see someone or something worth fighting for, fight for it. And eventually your eyes will start to appreciate what they do see within yourself as well. But at the beginning, it may be hard to look at yourself.
Do you think that shift in focus is really what pulled you through?
It was the start of the positive journey. Um, the anger didn't disappear overnight, neither did the depression or the anxiety. It was a journey I was on, but it was the start of it. There was a few more other stories I could share that really helped to see perspective and engage for me to really grab onto that. I need to fight.
Let's dive into that a little bit because that those are the messages that I really like to share with listeners. Um, because I think when you're in the weeds, when things are so freaking dark, there's not even a glimmer of light anywhere. Sometimes it's perspective, right? It's like you say, flipping the lens. How are you looking at things? All of that. So share some of those stories with us, please.
I'll share three, and I'll stop at each one so you can ask a deeper question if you want. The
Sure.
first one, we got to go backwards in time. My fifth wedding anniversary happened on June 27th, 2003. So I'm in the hospital, angry, depressed, and I had ventilator in my mouth and tubes in my lungs and my stomach, feeding me and helping me breathe and draining fluid from my lungs. And on my fifth wedding anniversary, I woke up and there was Dr. Tredget at the foot of my bed and the charge nurse and the respiratory therapist. And he's like, we're gonna extubate you today. I'm like, "Oh, just pull the ventilator." I'm like, okay, great. And this is all in my head because I can't talk. I'm like, I remember all those times going to OR when I had to get bagged and I couldn't breathe and I tried to breathe. I'm like, what if you're wrong? Because, and you didn't prepare me at all. This is a surprise for me. I'm like, what if you're wrong and I can't breathe? So they pulled the tube. He asked me to take a deep breath. I did. It was more of a sigh of relief that he wasn't wrong. He asked me to say a few words. My first words were with a really small, scratchy voice were, "What do you want me to say?" Can you believe 6 months of being quiet and your first words are angry words? What do you want me to say? And he was testing my vocal cords to see if I even had a voice. He asked me to cough a few times. I went, and the reason being is now I had to start expelling all the fluid from my lungs out myself, which is a long process. And, but honestly, when I said, "What do you want me to say?" I was not wasting my voice on that man. There was no way. Prior to that, the way I communicated was by blinking, and they'd have a board and my wife would spell A, B, C, and I'd blink the word. And that's how I communicated. But I was heavily medicated and I was always extremely tired. And it did not take me much to lose focus or not know. And I'm also dyslexic. So if I couldn't spell a word, anything pissed me off. If I missed the letter, if I couldn't spell it, if I made a mistake in any way, I'd just get so mad and I'd roll my eyes in the back of my head and pretend I was asleep and just be like, get out of my room. I can't even talk to you because I can't say it. And then so I finally had the chance, and I can't tell you how many times I blinked, I love you to Tina. Um, but that voice was not being wasted on that doctor. So I waited all day. Tina came every evening, and she got to the hospital. She didn't also know what happened. So the nurses, they couldn't hold back good news, but they also didn't tell her what had happened. So she knew something positive happened that day. And she came into my room, and when she opened up the door, I told her I loved her. That was the her fifth anniversary present. That was a present the hospital gave us. I share that story with you because I have come to appreciate that you can't go through life on your own. And when days get hard, and we all have bad days, you need to have people there to support you and help you through those bad days. The problem is those when we're hurting, we tend to be like, I can do this on my own. I don't need anyone's help. I'm actually not going to share what's happening with me. And that's a very, again, that's a dangerous thing. That's the anger taking control of you because you're limiting yourself on success. And when the interesting dynamic is, though, is if you see someone you love going through something hard, you want nothing more than to help them. And I find it's a very ironic dynamic that we have is like when I'm hurting, I don't want any help. But if I see someone I love hurting, I want to do everything I can to help them, which is ironic. We have to learn to accept help. And the reason being is when I was dark and angry and depressed and whatever, it was the way I look at it is like the hand, right? I was this little thumb and I was trying to solve all my problems by this little thumb by myself. But the moment I started to accept help, I started to embrace my support of my wife and the doctors and nurses and therapists and all their expertise and my friends and my family, and there was complete strangers. All of a sudden, I had all these people trying to help me solve my problems. And I can tell you that the hand is way stronger than the thumb. It's like all these experts and loved ones trying to help me were way stronger and more equipped to help me through that problem than me on my own. So that would be the first story I'd share is that love story of my wife supporting me, telling her I loved her. What's interesting though, and I'll conclude it with this, that was a high point in my journey and I was excited. That was actually the first day I was happy in the hospital. 3 days later, Tina came to see me and that's when I said, this is not the man you married. Take everything and go. I'll completely understand. The anger took control of me again. And it's a journey. You don't get through a journey going through. I had a great day. It's all going to be great now. You're going to be, it's ebbs and flows. You're going to have low points. You're going to have high points. When those low points hit, you're going to want to push people out of your life. Well, that's when you want to bring them back in and be like, you know what? It's hard for me today. And right now, I just need your shoulder. I need you to just support me right now.
I first have to say that that is such a beautiful story. Such a beautiful story. I know you probably can't see it in the video here, but yeah, that one gets me in the feels. It really does. And I think that your message is such a good one. And I think it's relatable to every kind of adversity out there, whether it's mental health struggles, whether it's, enduring the loss of a child, whether it's anything, is that we are stronger together. I'm just going to send a quick question back to you, but do you think that is because, and I am guilty of this as well. Do you think it's not only I can do this myself, or that we don't want to burden our loved ones with our troubles?
I think it's a combination of a lot of
Yeah.
things. So one of them is we use I don't want to burden you as an excuse. I don't think there's I don't want to burden you as a actual reason it's an excuse, but I really do feel like it's more that we don't want to open up. We don't want to because to open up and say this is what I'm going through means that I also have to expose who I am and parts of my internal self that I don't show the world every day. And I'm really not comfortable with sharing the world those things every day. And you know what? You're not an expert either. You're probably gonna give me advice that I don't want to hear. I find that a lot. I don't like the advice you just gave me, right? So then I get mad at you, or you didn't say it exactly the way I wanted you to say it. It's like, who cares? I'm here because I love you and I'm supporting you. I'm not going to have all the perfect answers, but you know what? I'm going to be there perfectly supporting you, and if you let me. So
And I think the key there that you touched on is communication. None of us have that mastered, but if we can keep communicating and speak from our hearts. After we lost our daughter, my husband and I grieved very, very, very differently. But we kept coming back to, I love you. I'm sorry I can't support you right now because I'm busy trying to keep myself standing and our support our son. But I love you. I love you. And that just was thankfully enough, that we probably grew apart for a while, but we grew back together, and we grew back together because of our communication, grew back together stronger.
I do find though, to expand upon that really quickly, in a relationship, I've been married for 25 years now. We've never always been at the same even keel of the relationship. There's times when we were, but then all of a sudden something happens and Tina's like boom, 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 and she grew and matured a little bit more in our relationship. And I'm like, I'm still here. And I'm like, oh, and then 6 months later, I'm like, boom, 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 and I catch up, right? And then a year later, I'm like, boom, 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 and I'm up here and she's here. And it's like, oh, and that's those times is when you find there might be a little bit imbalance in your life, but if you let time go on, you catch up to each other. So
Yep. Yep. And I think that old thing, I think I heard got this advice when we first got married like 30 years ago, but put your partner first. That is something that's always stuck with me, through thick and thin. Put your partner first, and that seems to solve a lot of issues. Um, but let's talk a little bit about resilience. I
sure.
think you are truly one of the most resilient human beings I know. What makes you resilient, and what do you think makes people in general resilient?
Well, I've already given you two stories, so we'll go to the third story, which is perfect timing. So the first story is you can't get better on your own. That's the support of my life. Second story is you got to start finding things worth fighting for. Let your eyes turn out and find those most important things. Third story is perspective. I went home to the hospital on Boxing, or so I went home from the hospital for 2 hours on Boxing Day. I was supposed to go on Christmas, but it didn't work out. It took two paramedics and two nurses and about 3 bags of medical garments. I stayed in the stretcher the entire time, and I dictated I didn't want a single child in the room because I didn't think any of my nephews or nieces could handle what they're going to see. The only child in the room was Amber, and she was my baby, so that made sense. When I did get home, there was my grandpas, my grandmas, aunts, uncles, friends, adults, all adults, brothers, sisters. So, and they had all these presents, and everyone else had already opened their presents, and I couldn't open presents. I was completely useless still at that time. So my wife would open the presents, and anger took over me. Every time I saw something, I'm like, well, that's nice. I haven't worn clothes in 9 months. Thank you for a sweater I'll never wear again. In my mind, that's what I'm saying, right? Or, oh, you got me an Xbox. I know it's a $300 gift, but these hands will never play with a controller again. Thank you, right? Like I just turned everything into a moment to be angry. This love from people. And then after 2 hours at home, it was time to go back to the hospital. So they load me back in the ambulance. And in Edmonton, we have the White Mud Freeway. I lived on the west end of Edmonton. And the time of year is really important. This is Christmas. So 4 in the afternoon, the sun's already setting here in northern Canada. And I'm going from west to east to the hospital. So I'm looking at the sunset the entire way going down the White Mud Freeway. And as the sun set, all I could see looking out the back of the ambulance was red and orange and yellow painted right across the sky. And it was just super beautiful. And in my mind, I sat there so quietly, lied there so quietly, just looking at that sunset, taking it in. And what the paramedic didn't realize was the perspective I was gaining. The last time I saw red, orange, and yellow, my life was being destroyed. And now it's painted right across the sky in the most beautiful way I could ever picture it. And in my mind, I'm like, maybe, maybe the fire didn't have to be destructive. Maybe this could be a sunset. And it really changed my perspective on what was possible. And so when Tina came to visit me that night after my family left, about an hour and a half later, she walked by the window. Yeah, there's a big bay window for isolation that they can observe you. And as soon as I saw her, I was like, here comes my sunshine. Um, sorry, I don't get to tell that story a lot. She honestly that moment, I needed to see a sunset. I'll put it that way. I needed to see some hope. And that hope came from realizing that fire can be beautiful. And maybe I could be too.
I absolutely love that story. And I'm so glad that you told us. Absolutely. And I'm a little bit of a believer in things find us when we need them most. And maybe you weren't ready to see the sunset before that, but I am so, so happy that that did help you on your journey. I have so many questions for you, Spencer. I just don't think we can get through them all. But can
Okay.
you share with us, as you said, I think anything after trauma, after something terrible in your life has happened, I call it a roller coaster. At the beginning, after losing Katie, I would say that I was on like a Six Flags, scream the whole way, want to vomit kind of roller coaster. And now I'm more on the kiddie roller coaster. I don't like roller coasters at all. So even the kiddie roller coaster, prevent or is not a lot of fun for me. But how do you cope? How did you cope? How have your coping skills changed over the years?
That is so funny that you describe it as a roller coaster because I do as well. So your screaming moment, Six Flags roller coaster, for me, it was my life changed and you hit rock bottom. And it's a far fall and it's a hard fall. And that's the screaming part, right? And then you get to that low point, and I'm sure you had like this ultimate low point was that initial despair of grief and overwhelming emotions of finding out your daughter is no longer here. And but what ended up happening is after you hit that low point, you actually start going up, but you don't realize it because you're now in the healing journey forward. So for me, it was physical and emotional, mental. For you, it'd be and spiritual. For you, the physical part wouldn't be there, but I'm sure all the emotional, spiritual, and um, mental stuff would all be there. But you start finding this way to heal, and then you hit a high point, and you hit those points where you like wake up one day or halfway through your day or whatever, you find yourself laughing. You haven't laughed in a week, and now you do. So for me, I say the first high point was when I came out of a coma, right? Because it wasn't that bad. That was the first time I was like, okay, it's not so bad. But then after I found that high point, I hit a low point again. Because what ended up happening is I gained something that day. Like I'm now awake, right? And for you, it was like, oh, I can laugh again, right? Or I can smile again, or I can hold my husband again, or something, right? Something hit that high point. And what happens when you hit that high point, you get to keep it. You can't be taken away from you. It's something I gained now, but I still have a lot more journey to go through. That one thing on its own is not enough. So you hit a low point again. But what's interesting is you don't fall as far because you actually got something. You got to keep something. And then you hit that low point, which would be like after I told Tina I loved her 3 days later, or after, I woke up, I was like, I became angry really quick, or told Tina she could leave me after I told her I loved her. I hit those low points every single time in my journey. Whenever I had a point that I was high, I have found that within an hour or a day or 3 days, I hit this low point where I tried to push something out of my life. But then what I came to realize, I kept what I gained. So the next climb wasn't as high and the next drop wasn't as low, which is weird that you then get to like a now I'm on a kiddie roller coaster. That's how I exactly describe it. It's like everyday life is little ups and downs, right? We don't have these huge drops and huge ups, but we're back to everyday life where we have ups and downs. So what I will go back to my near death experience a little. Um, I say what happened to me was a bad day, right? But I challenge people in my presentations. I'm like, have you ever had a bad day? Everyone's like, yeah. I'm like, I bet you've had so many bad days. You can't remember them all. Am I right? But then I go even further. I'm like, tell me a bad day you had 3 months ago or 6 months ago. And most people can't even tell me what their bad day was 3 months ago or 6 months ago. Yet I guarantee you had one then. And then it's like, well, and when you have those bad days, they consume you. They absolutely consume you. It's like they change the whole outcome of your day sometimes. And yet they were so meaningless, you don't even remember it 3 months later. The only time anyone can ever say, I do have a bad day I can share with you 6 months ago was when they lost somebody or when they lost a job or, they had something that affected their most important thoughts. When you have something that affects those most important thoughts, you remember those days. But short of that, our bad days usually are so meaningless, we don't even remember them.
Yeah. They're blips in the big scheme of thing, right? I think both of us, comparing our journeys to a roller coaster, I think that is a good analogy, in my mind at least, of resilience. And I think resilience is staying on the darn roller coaster and accepting that the ride is not always fun, and accepting that the ride is hard, and that the drops are going to come, and that those moments that you want to scream and barf are going to come. But to keep going. And I think we get a little bit stronger, right? Every time that we have a really, really tough time on our journey, that makes us stronger. I know in the beginning, I hated when people said, "Oh, you're so strong." And I just wanted to scream, "I have no option." And you probably felt the same way as well. Like nobody gave me a choice in this. But I truly think that when you go through hard times, you do become strong. Absolutely. One quick question here, and that is, do you think that as humans, we have to go through adversity in order to become resilient?
Yes and no. In a perfect world, no, we shouldn't have to go through these things to become resilient. But and there's time your listeners are gonna be like, "Oh, that so makes sense." And but then the next time you have a bad day, are you really gonna think back to, well, what did Spencer say, and how do I apply that now? Like that's what I did with COVID because I have been through it, that I know these tools and I know first you feel what you're feeling, right? Then you have to be, instead of letting that trap happen and catch you, you cap it off. Like I give myself 3 days. I don't care what the situation is. 3 days, I will grieve. After 3 days, I will start to move forward. Doesn't mean I give up the grieving instantly, but I'm now on a path of moving forward. But you have to flex those muscles, you have to grow them. And the way you do it is by putting into practice positive habits when things get hard, because then you become more resilient on being able to get through things. So you say resiliency is these ebbs and flows and you going through the roller coaster thing. I say resiliency is having the strength to get out of your own way.
Ooh, that is so good. So good. And so, so true. Absolutely. I know there's some people that are listening that are going to want to look you up. They're going to want to find your book, and they're going to want to find your website, maybe book you as a speaker. Where's the best place for them to go?
Well, you can Google my name, Spencer Beach. There's two Spencer beaches in the world. One's a real beach in Hawaii, which I've been to. It's a beautiful beach. Please don't pee on it. There's public washrooms there. The other is me, or you can go to spencerspeaks.ca. The book can only be found on my website. You can get used books through Amazon if you are looking for saving money, and I'm completely fine with that. I wrote the book to help people, and I think the worst thing for a book once it's read is to sit on a shelf and never be read again. So yeah, if you can find a cheaper way of getting the book, take advantage of it. And you can also get the book as an ebook as well. And it's
Perfect.
called In Case of Fire.
Yes, and read it. Like I say, it was amazing. I don't remember many of the books that I read, but I will always, always remember yours. Spencer, you truly define resilience. Massive gratitude for being here today.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, be well and stay resilient, and we'll catch you next time. Remember, you were made for more.